Hello and welcome to By the Book. I'm your host, Joe Hebert. Today we continue our course on truth, justice, and leadership with the study of St. Thomas Aquinas. In earlier episodes, we talked about the relationship of faith and reason in Aquinas. We saw that they are harmonious, they're complementary. Faith gives us access to the reasoning of God, which supplements our own reason and elevates it, but does not replace it. So we still have to reason about matters of faith. And then we turn to the topic of the end or purpose of human life. And the first point we saw was that even though there's a great diversity of activities and even of character types and things like that, diversity of cultures, we would, as we would put it today, Aquinas argues there is one universal end that is true and good for all human beings, and that's because we do share a nature, human nature, and it has an intrinsic purpose. And as we delve into that purpose, which in a sense is what this course is all about, we'll see that it leaves room for that, healthy diversity, but it also ties it together. So it's not just a chaos. It's not just a bunch of random differences among people, but they'll exist within a unified structure. So this is one of those broad overview type concepts that we'll keep coming back to as we go through the details of it. The next point we saw was that happiness, which is that end, the universal end that we all share, is something that we cannot perfectly achieve in this life. And we looked at some of the nuances of that. Really crucial to see that it doesn't make this life meaningless, and it doesn't mean that there is no meaningful sense in which we can be happy in this life. There is a difference in kind, not simply degree, between the happiness that we can achieve in heaven versus on earth, which is part of the reason that his answer is no, we can't be happy in the truest sense on earth. But there are many analogies, and there's many connections between what we can achieve and are striving to achieve on earth, and then the perfect fulfillment of that in heaven. So there's a continuity between, you could say, the elements of happiness that we can experience and that we can piece together on earth, and the perfect happiness which we can hope for in the next life, and which we can also anticipate in certain ways in this life. And so today we're going to look at something that has already come up in these discussions, but we're going to look at it in finer detail, which is the question whether man can attain happiness by his natural powers. We've already seen that the answer is no. This is part of the reason that we can't be truly happy on earth, is because our natural powers are insufficient for happiness. Perfect happiness, as we saw, has to include being invulnerable, to suffering, and actually knowing what we want to know, which is the mind of God. Neither of those things is achievable, at least in any sustainable way, in this life. But this is a related but slightly different question, which is, by what power do we actually achieve happiness? And this is important because happiness is a fulfillment of our nature, and a major part of what our nature is the faculties or powers that it includes. Because we're human, we can do certain things that rocks cannot do, or that amoebas cannot do, or that jellyfish or elephants cannot do. So if this is a distinctively human happiness we're talking about, then it seems like it should fit into our powers as human beings, which are our natural powers. And as we'll see, that's not quite the case. Again, like with the earthly happiness, there is a very subtle reality here, which is that our natural powers are very relevant, and they are sort of the springboard into this, but they're not sufficient all by themselves. And so we'll see with the objections and the responses how Aquinas is going to work through the complexities of his position on this question. So, as is often the case, the objections are quite strong. In this first objection, it would seem that man can attain happiness by his natural powers, for nature does not fail in necessary things. But nothing is so necessary to man as that by which he attains the last end. Therefore, this is not lacking to human nature. Therefore, man can attain happiness by his natural powers. So it's a good argument. Aquinas agrees that nature is a guide to, nature contains purposes. And so the fact that we desire something by nature, that's a natural desire, is evidence that it's possible to fulfill that. And this goes right along with that, which is that, well, normally that would mean that it's possible by nature, because nature is the thing that is pointing to the possibility of it. So nature should be the thing that makes it happen. And so it's not a bad objection, and we'll see how he handles that as we get into this. Next objection, also quite strong. Further, since man is more noble than irrational creatures, it seems that he must be better equipped than they. But irrational creatures can attain their end by their natural powers. Much more, therefore, can man attain happiness by his natural powers. So this isn't quite a no fair kind of argument. Hey, how come animals can achieve happiness and we can't? But it is saying that, this is how nature seems to work. If squirrels really, desire those acorns, they have the ability to find them and to, store them and utilize them for what they need. Nature is not going to fail them. So how would it be that human beings who are higher than animals, nature is going to fail us and not enable us to achieve our goal as human beings? That would seem odd. So again, we'll have to see how Aquinas will respond to this. And last but not least is the third objection, which says happiness is a perfect operation according to the philosopher, that's Aristotle, in the Ethics. Now, remember, I mentioned before, this is one of the ways that classical theory has been misrepresented in modern thought, going back to Thomas Hobbes, who I would assume deliberately mischaracterizes classical thought as saying happiness is some kind of a static condition that we achieve, and somehow we magically become happy and then we don't have to do anything anymore. But here you can see, going back to Aristotle, as quoted by Aquinas here, happiness is a perfect operation, meaning happiness is a way of life. It's a way of being and acting. Happiness is an active thing. So it's when you find the right way of living and you keep living that way, that's what happiness means in classical thought. Now, the beginning of a thing belongs to the same principle as the perfecting thereof. The whole concept of perfection means just completing. So you complete what you started. Now, since therefore the imperfect operation, which is as the beginning in human operations, is subject to man's natural power, that is, we can start on the path to happiness through our own powers, first by desiring it, and then by ascertaining and doing the necessary steps towards it, whereby he is master of his own actions. All of this, if we were to delve into, could be tied to things like our rationality, our free will, and other fundamental aspects of our human nature, which give us these powers. Which, again, the powers are really are strongly associated with intertwined with the desires. If we have a power to do something, we have a desire to fulfill that capacity, that potential that we have. So if we can start on the path to happiness by our own powers, it would seem the perfection of the thing should also come by the same powers, which produce the same operations, right? So the operation from beginning to end should be consistent with itself. It seems, therefore, that man can attain to perfect operation, another term for happiness, by his natural powers. But of course, as we know by now, the objections are not Aquinas' position, and he makes his position known in his said contra. Man is naturally the principle of his action by his intellect and will. These are some of the faculties that we've seen they put us on the path to happiness. They are the part of our nature that means, because of our intellect and our free will, we are orientated towards this perfect happiness. We can't settle for lesser things because our intellect is capable of always going further than any particular good or particular satisfaction, and our will can then track our intellect. So those are the natural faculties that put us on this trajectory, if you will, towards this happiness. But here's where it comes in that there's something more complicated going on. By nature, we have this directedness towards perfect happiness, but final happiness prepared for the saints surpasses the intellect and will of man. So this is something different from the squirrels or the elephants. The things that by nature we have a desire to do and we are able to conceptualize at least in a fuzzy way, but to actually achieve them is beyond our capacity. For the apostle, St. Paul says, "Eye has not seen nor ear heard, neither has it entered into the heart of man." Notice how this tracks the intellect and the will. So neither our intellect nor our will has seen or understood what things God has prepared for them that love him. So what this basically is pointing to is that God himself is the ultimate good and the ultimate object of our desires. And to understand God and to truly love God as he deserves to be loved with infinite love is something that is beyond our capacity, our intellect, and our will. And so this shows something very peculiar about human intellect and will, because in a certain sense, our intellect and our will, they are what actually direct us towards God. In other words, they are made for the sake of knowing and loving God. That's why they were made in the first place. By nature, we have that impetus that we want to know God and we want to love God. That's not something that comes through faith or supernatural grace. That's something that we're originally made for by nature. However, we don't have the ability to fulfill that desire and to fulfill that natural inclination without some further help. Therefore, man cannot attain happiness by his natural powers. So we were created in a different way than, say, like animals. They were created that they have certain desires and they can fulfill them by nature. We were created by nature to have certain desires which we cannot fulfill by nature. So it does seem pretty strange. How is Aquinas going to explain that? So here's Aquinas' answer. And we'll see it's a complex answer. We want to break it down carefully. I answered that imperfect happiness that could be had in this life can be acquired by man by his natural powers in the same way as virtue, in which operation it consists. So let's just stop with that for a minute. What Aquinas is saying is that, as we saw before, there is a kind of happiness that we can achieve in this life. And it's not worthy of the unqualified name happiness. He wants to keep that term for the perfect happiness that we are in fact made for, but we could see that it is hugely significant. First of all, we can achieve it in this life by our natural powers. So that's a huge thing. Also, if we compare the nature of this perfect happiness in heaven and the earthly happiness, they're not opposed to each other, and they are analogously connected to each other. And in a sense, they're practically connected. That what we have to do to achieve perfect happiness in heaven is partly to also do what we have to do to achieve earthly happiness. That is to practice virtue. And that's one thing he's saying here, is that the operation, the activity of being happy on earth is the operation or activity being virtuous. So this is the fundamental Socratic idea that the way to achieve happiness is to be virtuous. To be virtuous, as we know, is to be reasonable and do what is right and good in accordance with the nature of things at all times. So this is something that does exist and is doable by nature. It's imperfect, as we saw before, because it doesn't give us the complete knowledge of God and therefore of this order that we want to know. It leaves us with a partial understanding of that. And it also doesn't protect us against many types of suffering and really guaranteed eventual death. Okay? But that being said, as long as we're on earth, this is a necessary and intrinsically good thing. It's not sufficient, but it is necessary and it is good. It's intrinsically good. To do the opposite would always be wrong. To be vicious is never justified. So we don't want to pass this over too easily. Aquinas is acknowledging the existence of something that is huge and significant. And because today it is so easily dismissed, I don't want to, glance over this in going through his answer. But he does go on, of course. He says, perfect happiness, as stated above, consists in the vision of the divine essence. Now, this is something we can't do on earth, but he's going to explain a little bit more clearly over here why that is the case. The vision of God's essence surpasses the nature not only of man, but also of every creature. So he's saying here, even the angels could not see God as they desire to without God's help. So if maybe that makes us feel better, right? If we thought, hey, how come squirrels can get what they want and we can't? Well, squirrels can't get what we want. They can't have the vision of God, but even angels couldn't have that without divine assistance. For the natural knowledge of every creature is in keeping with the mode of his substance. Thus it is said of the intelligence that it knows things that are above it and things that are below it according to the mode of its substance. So just as we know the way, a squirrel experiences the world is different from how we experience, even if we're looking at the same things, the way it sees, trees and grass and acorns is different from how we're going to see them because we're human. Same thing if we're looking, up to higher levels, the way we're going to understand God is not even close to the way he understands himself. Okay, so that's basically what this is saying, is that just the nature of what we desire to know is inherently above us. And so, yeah, we could have some dim, view of this thing, but by nature, we're never going to have the kind of comprehensive and adequate view of it that we really desire to have. Every knowledge that is according to the mode of created substance falls short of the vision of the divine essence. That's self-evident at this point. We're lower than God, so we can't experience God the same way he experiences himself, which infinitely surpasses all created substance. Consequently, neither man nor any creature can attain final happiness by his natural powers. So don't feel bad, but it's the nature of what we desire. No nature could be capable of what we by nature desire to do. So on the one hand, it seems like, maybe this isn't very fun because we're designed to desire something that we can't actually have by nature. But that's because what we're designed to desire is so great that no nature could possibly achieve it without help. So we're kind of looking at the limits of nature here. And so the first objection, again, was very strong, saying, hey, nature doesn't fail, right? If nature gives us a desire, it will give us the ability to fulfill it. And Aquinas, of course, agrees that generally that's the case. But here, of course, we're talking about a special case. Just as nature does not fail man in necessaries, although it has not provided him with weapons and clothing, as it provided other animals, because it gave him reason and hands with which he is able to get these things for himself. Let's look at that. He's saying, we could be envious of animals because they have claws and they have wings and they have, fangs, and they have all these tools that are built in which enable them to do a lot of things just by nature that we cannot do all alone by nature. We would be one of the weakest of the animals if it just came down to what we're given, in immediate capacity, in instinctive physical capacity. But on the other hand, we know the opposite is true, right? Human beings dominate the earth. Why is that? Because of our reason and our hands. That's an interesting combination, right? Our intellect, but our body is also designed to host that intellect and to be a vehicle for that intellect. So just as we walk upright, and therefore we can not only reason about the world, but we are orientated towards seeing the world and looking at it and thinking about it, rather than being on all fours and just instinctively grappling with the world. So even our physical makeup, including our hands with these flexible digits, This is something which directly doesn't help us too much, but through the instrument of reason, and then coming up with techniques and technologies and things like that, we can have tremendous power over the physical environment. So that's just the analogy. That's, it's an interesting aside there, but he's just going to use that as an analogy for what he's talking about, which is, what about knowing God? What about ultimate happiness? Neither did it fail man, that is nature. Nature didn't fail us in things necessary, although it gave him not the wherewithal to attain happiness. So this is the crux of it. Nature made us desire happiness, but did not give us the ability to do it. But that's not a failure on nature's part. Why is that? Because first of all, it couldn't do. You can't expect the impossible. This is beyond nature itself. Nature could not give us what it made us desire. But here's how nature helps us out. It did give us free will with which we can turn to God, that he may make us happy. So this is the crux. We have what we need, but it's not just like with reason. We don't have the claws and the fangs and the fur and everything. We have the ability to think through and come up with ways of doing what animals do, and even better than what they do, through reason and manipulation of things. Likewise here, we can't directly know God, but we have free will by which we can turn to God. We can ask God for help. We have the ability to pray. We have the ability to turn to God and to befriend him. And that's where he's going to go here. We're going to spend a lot of time actually on the virtue of charity, which is friendship with God. But he's anticipating that here by quoting Aristotle. And it's really interesting. He's gone from St. Paul, but now he's connecting to Aristotle. For we do by means of our friends, what we do by means of our friends is done in a sense by ourselves. So by nature, we're not able to be happy, but in a sense, yes, because nature has given us the ability to be friends of God. We can choose to be friends of God. And like Aristotle said, what we can do with the help of our friends, in a certain sense, that's something we can do. Oh, I know a guy who can do this. Well, if you're close to this person, you know him, you're on good terms with them, that means you have an ongoing capacity to do whatever this guy can help you to do. And so this was the plan from the beginning. We're made to desire happiness. We cannot achieve it by ourselves, but we can achieve it with God's help. And we are able to ask for that help. And God is willing to give that help. So put together, nature is not failing us. Nature is actually opening up a path to something great and glorious beyond itself. Now, this suggests, the answer to the second objection. How come the animals can be fulfilled and by nature and we can't? And the answer is fairly simple and very commonsensical. The nature that can attain perfect good, although it needs help from without in order to attain it, is of more noble condition than a nature which cannot attain perfect good, but attains some imperfect good, although it need no help from without in order to attain it, as Aristotle says. So again, Aquinas is showing how the wisdom of Scripture is consistent with the wisdom of philosophy here, that the philosophers can easily appreciate the fact that just as we don't envy squirrels because they get all the nuts, right? They do have an easy instinctive way. They're built to harvest those nuts. They do an amazing job of it. But if we decided that we really needed nuts, we have reason, we have hands, we can come up with means of doing it. We'll end up doing it better than the squirrels. But going beyond this, if we are capable of knowing God with the help of God, that's something that no squirrel will ever do, right? So we don't have to feel bad about it, and we don't have to think we're less noble than squirrels because we need help to do what we're made for more than they need help. Now, his response to the third objection is a little bit technical, but let's just take a look at it and try to see what it means in plain language. When imperfect and perfect are of the same species, same kind, they can be caused by the same power. So, if you're learning how to read and write and you're starting with, the little readers with Jack and Jill are going up the hill, and later you're reading War and Peace, that's a perfection, but it's all continuous, and that's because it's all the same kind of thing. It's just getting, more and more complex, but it's not changing in kind. But if you're starting with one thing, but your goal is to get to a different kind of thing, you're going to need to have some kind of a new input, to get to the end. So it does not follow necessity that the beginning and end have to be the same operation if they be of different species, of different kinds. For not everything that can cause the disposition of matter can produce final perfection. So here's where he's getting a little technical, but basically saying the fact that we're inclined to know God, it does mean that by nature we do have a concept of God, but the vision, actually seeing God, is of a different kind. It's a whole different thing than simply having a concept of God. Just think about the difference between having a concept of another human being versus actually seeing and being with another human being. They're different things. So the vision of God surpasses the concept of God that we have by nature. That concept is able to make us desire God by nature, but we can't have that vision which perfects that desire by nature. So the imperfect operation, in this case, it would just be like, the more human level concept of God is subject to man's natural power. And this goes along with the virtue that we can have in this world. There's a natural theology. There's a philosophical ethics, a philosophical understanding of virtue. And this produces a real, if imperfect, form of happiness that we can pursue. And it's also, again, consistent with the greater happiness that we could pursue with God's help. As we see with the repeated references to Aristotle and others, that it is very continuous, what natural reason can tell us versus what we can know by revelation. But it's not of the same species as that perfect operation, which is man's happiness. It's never going to be the same as actually seeing God face to face, since operation takes its species from its object. So the last technical point here is that, seeing God, again, since God is above us and above all creation, that is a completely different kind of operation to actually see God than it is to see anything that is created. And we do have a natural capacity to see and understand creatures, but other than having this sort of sense that God is out there, by nature, we simply don't have the eyes to see. We don't have, the heart even to love in the proper way. It's something that we need help to do that. And so all of this comes down to sum it up, a couple of things I would stress. The natural desire and the natural virtues and the human earthly kind of happiness, these things are all real and good. They're not being thrown under the bus. They're not being denigrated. They're not being left behind. They're things that the saints would still continue to practice all these virtues, to think all of these true thoughts, and to do all these good deeds. They're all good and even necessary. The point that Aquinas is emphasizing, there's something more, there's something greater, that we are also made for that greater thing, but we are not given the ability to do it by ourselves, but we're given something that is actually more precious than that, which is the ability to turn to God, who in friendship can make it possible for us to achieve that. So we can already see here that if we say, well, what is the greatest activity that we can participate in, virtue is a good answer, living a virtuous life. But even better is to say living a virtuous life in friendship with good friends. Even Aristotle had pointed out, a truly virtuous life, you need to have friends to help you live virtuously. But Aquinas would add, in a friendship with God. If we add friendship with God, this is what puts it on the trajectory towards not just an imperfect kind of happiness, but towards perfect happiness.